Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this Becoming Professional webinar. My name is Chris Glennie. I'm the CEO at Morrisby, and I'm delighted to be hosting this edition of Becoming Professional, where we aim to delve inside the world of different careers, different worlds of work, in order to give people an idea of what it's like to be in the particular profession under discussion. And today I'm delighted that we're hosting some delegates to talk about speech and language therapy. I will give them a chance to introduce themselves in just a moment, but a little bit of housekeeping is that there will be no opportunity for live questions and answers, but there is at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box. If you want to leave any questions or comments for generally or for any of the particular speakers today, then please do use that facility, and we will try and pick that up either during the course of the webinar or at the end when we've finished. So once again, thank you for joining. I'm now going to ask my guests to introduce themselves. Philippa, perhaps I could start with you. If you'd like to just introduce yourself a little bit, tell people who you are, what you do, and we'll come back to then the details later on.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chris. My name is Pippa Cotterill, and I work as a speech and language therapist. I have two jobs at the moment. I work 1 day a week as the head of the Wales office for the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, which is the professional body for the profession. And then I work 4 days a week as the deputy head of speech and language therapy in a health board in South East Wales that covers 5 different local authorities, but is one NHS organisation.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll come back to lots of the words that you used in that presentation during the course of the next half an hour. Poppy, perhaps you'd like to go next.
Hi, so my name is Poppy and I am currently training to be a speech and language therapist at Cardiff Metropolitan University, and I'm in my 3rd year.
Excellent, thank you. And again, we'll come back to what that actually means to be a student later on. And also with you, Annalise, perhaps you'd like to just introduce yourself.
Yes, hi. So my name is Annalise. I am also a student of speech and language therapy. I am also in my 3rd year, and I'm also studying in Cardiff Metropolitan University. And incidentally, I'm in the same cohort as Poppy.
Excellent. So Cardiff well represented this afternoon then, which is terrific. So Philippa, let's get down to basics. What is speech and language therapy?
That's a very good question. Speech and language therapy is a lot of different things. There are many different areas that speech and language therapists work in. They work with people right from when they're born to the end of their life. And that's a bit of the scope of it. I'm not saying that everybody works with all those people by any means, but across the whole profession we do. So the bits that are maybe a little bit more obvious, so speech, language and communication, but also swallowing difficulties. And that's something that a lot of people don't know that we do. So we could work with babies when they're born if they're not swallowing properly, if they haven't got those reflexes that enable swallowing, and if taking on nutrition is a problem for them. Throughout children's development, we all develop speech language communication, but we all do it in slightly different ways, and speech and language therapists can be fundamental in ensuring that development happens. And if development doesn't happen in the way that we expect it, how can we help those children and the people around them? There are some conditions or areas that lots of people will have heard of that speech and language therapists can get involved with. That might be stammering, it might be selective mutism, it might be developmental language disorders, it might be speech disorders. So some of those terms are the ones that maybe people may have heard of. But then through into adulthood and also with children, we work with people's voice. So if they have voice difficulties, and then we might also get involved in some cancers, so head and neck cancer. We might also be involved in other conditions like Parkinson's disease, like dementia, some of those neurological conditions. And if people have a stroke, anything that impacts on people's speech, language, communication, and swallowing. Those are times that speech and language therapists could be involved in.
Thank you. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, speech and language, you sort of, being a natural language user, you think that you've got some idea what that is, but actually you've covered a huge range of things, and the swallowing thing is obviously really interesting. So what kind of settings do you work in then as a speech and language therapist?
So there are a huge range of settings. So it could be in hospitals. It could be in day centres. One of the groups that I missed out last time, so apologies, would be adults with learning disabilities. That would be another group, adults and children with learning disabilities. So we could be in day centres. We could be in schools and nurseries, and that's a lot of the background that I have, but also colleges. The speech and language therapists who work in prisons and youth offending services, the speech and language therapists who work for charities and national organisations such as the Stroke Association. There are speech and language therapists who work in private practice, either as a group together or maybe as individuals. And there are speech and language therapists who are employed by local authorities and by education. So yeah, a huge range. I guess rehab centres is another place where you might find speech and language therapists.
So if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been a speech and language therapist?
I don't mind you asking at all. So I did the degree course. I qualified in 1999. The course was 4 years long when I did it, but most of the courses are 3 years now. And yeah, I started work in the summer of 1999, and personally never looked back.
And so we'll come back to the kind of routes to training, degrees, apprenticeships, or whatever. But what were your motivations then to become a speech and what had you done before that? What brought you to the profession?
My background was for my A levels. I did science courses, and I looked into doing physiotherapy, but it didn't quite fit with me. It didn't float my boat. But I wanted to do something that was in the caring field, I've always been interested in language as well. I'm quite musical, and I think there's quite a lot of speech and language therapists who have got a kind of a music interest as well. So yeah, those were some of the things, and found speech and language therapy, went to see a speech and language therapist, and then applied for the courses from there.
Okay. I can see that James has joined us, but I can't see him. James, hi. Thank you for joining. I'm going to throw you in at the deep end, I'm afraid,
Brilliant.
James. Ask you to introduce yourself very quickly, but don't take a breather at that point, because I'm going to ask you some questions about, how you got into the profession, what your motivations were, that sort of thing. So just introduce yourself quickly, and then I'll ask some follow-ups.
Sounds good. Yeah, so my name's James. I'm a speech and language therapist specialising in clinical voice disorders and professional voice rehabilitation. So I'm based up here in Manchester.
So you use some words that, I'm personally not always familiar with. So explain a little bit what that means, what you do now then in your current role.
So I caught the back end of what Philippa was saying, and it sounds like she was explaining the breadth of what speech and language therapy is. Correct. And how diverse the profession is. So I work in quite a niche area of speech and language therapists. So I'm a voice specialist. So I work with patients, individuals who have difficulties with their speaking voices. So at some point in all of our lives, we've had that experience where we might have had a cold or COVID more recently, and our voices start to become hoarse or maybe breathier or rougher. Or we might have gone out for a few too many one night, or we might have had a party or something where we've been singing a bit too loud and our voices felt a little bit worse for wear the next morning. I work with people where they have that kind of presentation, but typically it's lasting for a longer period of time, or might be their voice presentation the whole time. So we refer to that as clinical voice disorders, when somebody's got a persistent voice change. And we do therapy with those patients to try and improve the quality of their voice in lots of different ways. And another part of my job is working with professional voice users. So really exciting part of my job is working with singers, actors, performers, and professional speakers who are using their voices on things like webinars, but also on the West End, in TV and film, to work with them to make sure that their voice is doing everything they need to do professionally in their role.
Excellent. So if I'm a bit hoarse in the morning, I can come to you then, can I?
Exactly right. Yeah.
There we go. And so what the last question I asked Philippa was about kind of the motivations for getting into the profession. What did you done before? What were you, what kind of brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's usually a link somewhere. There's usually a point in someone's life where they kind of cross paths with speech and language therapy, and it kind of goes, oh, that's interesting. So my background was I was an actor, so I went to drama school. I trained as an actor, and I worked for about 10, 15 years, predominantly working as a voiceover artist, and loved it. Really, really enjoyed that profession. But the kind of cross path moment for me was my dad had a stroke, and that introduced me to the dysphagia side, to the swallowing side of stroke management, when he was in hospital. And it just kind of sparked a bit of an interest. And I went down a bit of a rabbit hole of Wikipedia articles and the RCSLT website and lots of other resources. And again, as Philip was saying, just being fascinated by the breadth of the profession. And over a couple of years, I started volunteering, some work with people with aphasia, so communication disorder after stroke, did some work in special needs schools and pediatric settings, and enjoyed the diversity of it. Went to university, did the master's course. So I had a previous degree. I did a 2-year master's at City in London. I absolutely loved it. I was fascinated by everything, and every day I wanted to do something different, which was really, really exciting. And then, I did a generalist role for a little bit. So I worked in an acute hospital in Norwich, where I was working with people on the wards with swallowing difficulties and communication difficulties. And then had a little bit of a rotation in voice. And that's what kind of brought me back full circle, back to what I trained as an actor. And now I'm very fortunate to do that day in, day out here in Manchester.
Gosh, so full circle. So a change of career, but actually something that's brought you kind of back to your original career in some way. So
yeah, very much so. And it's really nice to be able to kind of pull on my training as an actor and my experience as a performer to the patients and clients that I'm working with.
And I know this question is going to be one of those, I can't possibly answer that question, but and I'm going to come back to Philippa on this, but as I've got you at the moment, James, what does a typical day look like? What does it feel like as well? Not just, what you do, but what does it feel like you're doing?
Yeah, so my days are incredibly diverse. So some days are purely therapy. So I might have patients back to back all through the course of the day. So as a voice therapist, I work purely as an outpatient therapist, which means people come outside the hospital into their appointments to see me. However, we have different days. So the reason I'm late is we're in our joint voice clinic, which is where we are working with ear, nose and throat doctors and consultants, and we're putting cameras up people's noses and having a look and seeing what their voice box is doing. I might be working in kind of group settings and working with multiple people. I might have sessions that are specific with performers, so incredibly diverse. Mm-hmm. There's lots of other things we do as speech therapists as well. So we do a lot of things like service development, where we're trying to improve the service and provide education and things as well to help people improve their voices and access to services too. So a typical day is never normally that typical, but it's really, really fun. It's really diverse, and I never get bored, which is the important thing.
I think one time if I ask this question and people go, oh yes, it's always the same every day, then I think that's the end of the webinar, actually. That's
I'd be bored out of my mind if I was doing the same thing. I'm really pleased I get that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Poppy and Annalisa, I will come to you in a second, but just I want to hear from Philippa. Philippa talked about, I think you have at least 2 jobs at the moment, and obviously you will have done jobs in the past. So again, what does a day look like? It will depend on where you are on that particular day, presumably. So again, what does it look like?
Absolutely. So a lot of my days over my career have been spending time in schools. So I might have been in one school for maybe 3 days in a week, or I might go to maybe 4 schools in one day. So it would be that, and speaking to the teachers, speaking to the teaching assistants, maybe speaking to if there's an ALNCO or a SENCO in the responsible for children with additional needs. Or it might be in a community clinic, similar to what James has talked about, where families would come to me. In my professional body job of ministers who are in the Welsh Parliament, trying to influence them to say that we need more speech and language therapists. Mm-hmm. And that's been really nice, because explaining to them what we do, and for them seeing some of the families that we help and that we make a difference to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, really interesting, and both Poppy and Annalise were nodding along vigorously when you talked about lobbying the Welsh government for more speech and language therapists, obviously with an eye to their own future. So, if I can turn now to Poppy and Annalise, you're both students at the moment, and I think there's two things, at least two things I'd like to explore now with you. First of all is the kind of, the motivation. What were you interested in? But then I'm actually quite interested in how do you then become, how do you qualify? What is the route? What are the different ways that you can become a speech and language therapist? And obviously the particular journey that you are on. So Poppy, if I can turn to you first, how did you get to where you are now? And what does it feel like to study, to be on the route to qualification?
So sort of similar to Pippa, actually, I wanted to do physiotherapy, but that just didn't quite inspire me. And I think we all have our own stories of how we first found out about speech and language therapy. And for me, I was working with a little girl who had speech and therapy at the time, and I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting, actually. And I looked into it. And went and got some work experience and thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I think to study is something so different to any other course, because I think you're just constantly being inspired by lecturers, inspired by the work that we see out on placement, and to learn in depth about things that I just wouldn't have even thought about. So, for example, we were learning about adults learning disabilities the other day, and we were having a discussion about how inaccessible the world is, even just things as simple as a bus timetable that we wouldn't even think, and we would just go and look. And there's so many times you have like those moments on the course when you're like, oh yeah, like wow, that is so important, and it's such a profession that's so compassionate that I think you just can't find that anywhere else. So it's quite hard to put into words how it feels, but I think if you're studying it, I think it's just inspiring and very eye-opening to the world, really.
Okay, so I'll come back to your kind of particular qualifications in the route, but I want to bring Annalise. You've been very patient. What would you agree with Poppy? Would you have a different sort of experience? How did you get to where you are now? Where have you come from, as it were?
So, well, I agree with Poppy on everything she said. I think to just go back quickly to what she was saying, I think it's also very empowering to know how much we can have, how much of an impact we can have on people's lives either after a big event like a stroke, or just because they've lived in the way they've lived since they were born. How did I become involved with speech and language therapy? It was very random. So what James and Philippa were saying, I actually resonated with me, because I used to be a teacher. So I'm a mature student, that's what they call it. So I used to teach languages at university, and I never really thought about speech and language therapy because I never needed it. I never knew anybody who did need it. And it was a very random conversation with my partner, who told me that his daughter would need speech and language therapy, and she was 18 months old. And I thought, how does an 18-month-old need speech and language therapy? They don't speak. And so I got curious, and yes, I just looked into it. What is it? What do we do? What do we learn? And it was also at a time for me, it was around COVID. So I thought, maybe I need to change. I wanted to change career as well. And speech and language therapy had everything I loved as subjects that were taught at university. So yes, the opportunities were there for me, and I happily.
And how have you found? So again, and I'll probably ask James this question as well. How have you found? You've had a career and you've kind of changing. How have you found the kind of, going back to school, as it were?
Well, I consider myself an eternal student. I love learning new things. I love it when my brain is boiling with information. And like Poppy was saying, it feels like we're making a difference. We're learning so many things. It doesn't feel like you're sitting down at a desk learning knowledge that you don't know what you're going to do with. It's actually applicable almost straight away.
And so, James, I saw you smiling when you thought, oh, you're going to be back in the hot seat. But, you know, we touched on this briefly when you told your story, but you did go back to school as well. And how did you find that?
I found it great. And interestingly, you know, I wasn't probably the brightest person academically when I was doing my kind of GCSEs and A-levels and moving through that. I was very much a creative, and I found kind of applying myself to the academic side of things quite difficult. And I went to drama school, and drama school isn't massively academic, it's very practical. So when I went and did my masters, and I'm kind of showing my age now, but I was 32 when I did my masters. I'd never really done any kind of formal academic work before, so it was a real kind of learning curve for me. But the honest answer is I absolutely loved it, and I felt incredibly supported. Like, you know, both the guys just a second ago mentioned that the teams and the lecturers that you're working with, the vast majority of them are therapists in their own right, or and with a massive passion for what they do. So the support I got both from the university, but also from my, you know, the lecturing team was great. And it actually, for me, gave me, it allowed me to understand that I had kind of skills and I wouldn't say talents, but I had skills and abilities that I wasn't quite familiar with. And that setting really facilitated that growth there. And actually now I'd consider myself a much more academic person. And it's given me a really good kind of scope on what I know and areas of passion that I didn't know I had, which is super exciting.
Excellent, great. Thank you for that. It's interesting how people kind of react, and don't worry about your age. You might see a bit of grey hair on my chin, so don't worry about that. So Poppy, I just want to come back to you then now, please. So you're in your third year of studying. What does that mean? What are there requirements around GCSEs and A levels? You know, where do you study? What kinds of courses do you need to look for? What's the process? What did it look like from your perspective?
You're testing my knowledge of it now with the exact sort of grade.
Philippa will come in and help you, I'm sure, at some point. But I think what people want to know is kind of like, you know, what did it, you know, you've made a decision and kind of how did you navigate your way to get to where you are now?
So personally, I came straight from A levels, which looked slightly different because we were coming out of COVID. But I believe I'm from England, so the GCSE system's a bit different than Wales, because in Wales you have the A, B, C, but in England you've got like the 5, 6, 7 sort of grading system. But I believe you need sort of like 5 GCSEs, and I'm sure Pippa will be able to correct me on this. And then an A level of some science sort. I'm not sure exactly, but personally I did a science, which really helped with the anatomy side in terms of swallowing difficulties. But a lot of people on our course have come from a linguistics background, so they've done things like English literature, and that really helps with the language side of things. And I think because the career is so broad, you don't quite realize how many skills that you're actually drawing from whatever experience you've had. And I think as long as you can show that you're a compassionate person, you're ready to learn, and you want to help people in any way, and sort of show that you're willing to put effort in and work hard, then I don't think the academic side of things is too much of a thing. But I'm sure Pip will be able to say more like the details on that.
So Pippa, help us fill in the blanks then, potentially. What's the kind of what's the academic requirement to get onto a training course?
I mean, there's different training courses for a startup, and so there's going to be different criteria across those. But yes, exactly as Poppy has said, from that perspective, 5 GCSEs, A levels, science, language background are very, very helpful. Some of the degree courses, so there's undergraduate courses, as Poppy and Annalise are doing, and as I did. There's a few places across the UK that do that. It was about 15, but it's growing all the time. Lots of universities are now offering courses in speech and language therapy, but it's not every university. So you do need to have a look and see where the course is offered. There are other ways. There are other ways of doing it. There's the masters side of it that James talked about. There are now starting to be some apprenticeships as well. Again, there's not many across the country, but there are more coming on board. So it's which means obviously that people can do it whilst they're doing a job and do that training. So we've got some people, I think, that are working as speech and language therapy assistants, and they historically they would have had to have left the job to go and do the course, but that they can start doing that. But as I say, there's only a few places that are doing that at the moment. But I think that's one of the really good things about the profession. It's growing in lots and lots of different directions and lots of different ways.
Thank you for that. And Annalise, you're also in your third year. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, we've talked about the academic side of it, which is apparently not overly burdensome. And I know that we were talking before we started about placements and that kind of practical aspect. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of balance between the academic work and the practical, and how that works?
So in Cardiff Metropolitan University, I don't know again how it is in other universities, but we have placements from the first year. So in year one, we have a 1 day a week placement for about 8 weeks, I think, just to see what the job is and follow a speech and language therapist in their daily or weekly life. In year two, we have one block placement of 2 weeks in September and another one of 5 weeks at the end of the year. So this is typically so the 5 week one is spread between 2 days in pediatric setting and 2 days in an adult setting. So we have an opportunity to experience working with different client groups. And in third year, so we have another 5 weeks of placement, which is the same format. So two days with pediatrics and 2 days with adults. And we'll finish by 1 day a week for 8 or 10 weeks, I think. So again, it gives us and opportunities to, it's quite hands-on as well. So as we progress throughout the years, we first observe, then give it a try, then maybe run part of a session or plan a session. So and all that with the supervision of the speech and language therapist, so we're not left to our own devices.
And how is that practical work assessed?
It's assessed, so the speech and language therapist, who is our practice educator, will give feedback to our tutors at university. So it's a pass-fail. It's not an assessment really, it's just a pass-fail kind of fill-in forms. But we also have, so this year, for example, at the end of our 5 week placement in December, we'll have a case report. So it's a bit of writing. I think this is the only time that we are assessed on a part of our placement, because up until that point, the placements are really opportunities for us to see what's happening and to develop our own skills as well.
Excellent. James, I think you see this from the other side. So can you say something about what it looks like from a kind of educator point of view?
Yeah, definitely. So it's something that we get to do. It's another, back to the diversity of every day. It's a part of what we do as qualified speech and language therapists is we work with students as practice educators. And it's a really exciting thing to do because we get to see, especially it's not that long since I was doing that. So it's quite nice to kind of be on the other side of it in a way. But yeah, placements are such a valuable part of the, putting the theory into practice. And as a practice educator, it's really nice to be able to facilitate that and kind of figure out what works for students. I think, I was super nervous when I went to my first placement. You kind of think, you're going to be assessed, everything's going to be really high pressure. Remember, we've all been there, we've all done it, we've survived it, and also we're therapists. At the end of the day, we understand, a big part of our job is making things work for patients, finding ways that help them and facilitate that learning and understanding. So when we have students here with us, it might be that they do a lot of observation to start with, but over time, what we'll do is we'll get them doing a little bit of work with patients. So we might get them running a little bit of a session or chipping in and kind of giving a little bit of advice, but that's all done with our support. And we never just throw people in the deep end. You know, it's all very much based on the theory and the kind of experience that they've had. And there are assessments. You know, ultimately we need to, the universities need to know how students are getting on. But to reassure you, it's not simply that you've got an 8-week placement. At the end of it, you've passed and failed. There's a big stamp that comes down and you're either in or you're out. All the way through that, there's ultimately supervision. You know, we're having conversations. What did you find hard? What did you learn? What would you like more of? We've got a student with us at the moment, and she's very much under the voice team. She's a voice therapy student, but she spent a day over at the Christie, which is a cancer centre in Manchester, with a head and neck team. She's on the wards with our dysphagia team, getting a really kind of a wide breadth of experience. So remember that we're here to support you, and we're very much here to make those placements work for you and get the most out of it.
Thank you, James. We've had a couple of questions in actually. So Philippa, you may have mentioned this. Is there an apprenticeship route to qualifying as a speech and language therapist?
Yeah, there is. It's in its infancy, and it hasn't. They haven't long started some of those courses, and I wouldn't say they're widespread in their availability. But I think, I hope I'm right in saying that they are available. Certainly, in the Midlands, I think there's apprenticeships up and running. But yeah, it's definitely something that we want to do more of, and there are some available now. Yes.
Okay, thank you. On a practical level, question is. And Poppy, I'm going to address this at you, but Annalise, you might want to pitch in. What exams have you had, and what are they examining?
I'm really sorry, you just froze then. Would you mind just saying that again? Sorry.
Yeah, the question is, what exams have you done, and what are they examining?
Yeah, so that's something that is quite nice about the course, is that you're assessed in lots of different ways. So they really do acknowledge that everyone is a different learner. So you might have some exams that you think really isn't me, for example, a written exam, but then you would also we have spoken exams. So for example, in our second year, we have a gentleman who comes in who's had aphasia, so a language impairment from stroke. And we get assessed on how well we can communicate with him and hold a conversation, and how well we can facilitate that. And then in our third year, we have an exam called a Viva, which is a spoken exam. So you'd be given a case and you have to talk about your management. But then we also have exams in a classroom where they've said, we've got a question and we have to write an essay. And then we've got multiple choice exams abroad, and for us we've had them online because of COVID, but that's sort of now back into person going into the new year. So I think for the new sort of cohorts coming through, it would probably look more in person, but you have coursework as well. So but I feel like the staff are really supportive, and it's at helping you with that, and it's quite spaced out throughout the year, so you're never too like jam-packed with it in a way.
Okay, thank you. And you know, again, Poppy or Annalise, you might want to take this one. It's a quite interesting one. What would your advice be to somebody putting a personal statement together to get onto a course?
That's a very good question. Well, I think again it might depend on what universities require. But I think not to worry too much about the fact that you don't know anything about the job, because that's the reason why you're taking the course. So I think Poppy mentioned a couple of times, you know, that you need to be compassionate. You need to want to help people. You need to want to make a difference. So I think making that show in a statement could be a very good point. She also said very rightly that, you know, you don't have to have a science background, because I have a language background, and it doesn't matter where you come from, so long as you are ready to, you know, learn and to contribute and to make a difference. I think that's what makes it stand out.
Excellent, great. I'm slightly conscious of time, but one of the things that the title of this webinar series is called Becoming Professional, and we focused on areas that, you know, are professions, and they have professional bodies, and they have you know, codes of ethics, codes of conduct, they're regulated. So Philippa, can you, there's always acronyms involved. You've got acronym behind your head. There's acronyms that people throw out in this world. So can you, at a relatively easy to understand high level, unpick what is a Royal College? What is the Health and Care Professions Council? You know, what is continuing professional development? Talk about the kind of professional infrastructure that's around being a speech and language therapist.
So the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, abbreviated to RCSLT, that's the professional body. And they are responsible for lots of different areas from the profession. So within my role within the Royal College is policy and public affairs, and that's lobbying and influencing and raising awareness of speech and language therapy. The Health Professions Council, Health and Care Professions Council, HCPC, that's the regulatory body. And anybody who is working as a speech and language therapist must be registered with them. You're not allowed to call yourself a speech and language therapist unless you are registered with the Health and Care Professions Council, and that's very, very important. Both the Royal College, as in the professional body, and the regulatory body, the regulatory body, they have standards of proficiency, standards that we have to adhere to in our professional work. Both of them emphasize the importance of continuous professional development, which can look like lots of different things. It doesn't have to look like every year I sit in a classroom and go on a course. It doesn't have to look like that at all. There's so many different ways that we can continue to develop as professions. And exactly as Poppy and Annalise have talked about the different ways that you can learn as students, you continue to do that when you are a speech and language therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I have been lucky enough, I have done a master's whilst I've been qualified, but that was only 3 years of the 24 years that I've done. The continuous professional development that I've done throughout all of the other years have been talking to colleagues, learning from different people, learning from different professions. Maybe it was from teaching, that sort of thing. But we have to prove that we're continuing to develop, and that's what's really important about the profession. If we just stopped when we finished university, the profession wouldn't be moving forward in the way that it is. So I hope that explains a little bit. Just one more thing to say, sorry, is that the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists is the professional body, but it's not the union. So some places the professional body is also the union, but not in this case.
Does the professional body, and apologies, I'm going to reveal my ignorance here. Does the professional body set the standards for the qualifications that you know, Poppy and Annalise, for example, are going through?
So my understanding is that the Health and Care Professions Council, they have to check that that people graduating from that course can have the title speech and language therapist, but the curriculum is heavily led by the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. So the two things do tie together, in that the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists talk about the curricula that needs to be included, and the HCPC make sure that you can use the title speech and language therapist at the end of that course. And it is really important that if people do want to be a speech and language therapist, they make sure that it is a course that will give you that entitlement to do that, because there can be different courses that might be called something similar but not give you that accreditation. So that's important to check.
Okay, so that's a really important point there, that people should check that their course is recognised as leading to qualification.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a really important point. Thanks so much for that. And I don't want to belabor this audience with the distinction between professional bodies and regulatory bodies. It's something you'll find out in the course of your initial studying and qualifying. It's not the thing you have to understand when you start, but you do have to understand it if you're going into a profession at some point. That it's not the Wild West out there. That there's a proper framework for studying, and that of course gives consumer confidence that who you purport to be, who you are, and what you can do is properly regulated, and that's the important thing there. So that's just about all that we're really going to have time for. I'm going to give you all 30 seconds to just say, you know, why you love being in this sector, why you would encourage others to come into it, and what the qualities are that people, you know, need to think that they have or they want to express in the work as a speech and language therapist. And I'm going to go around as you appear on my screen, which is I'm going to start with Poppy.
So it's really hard to sort of like word in one word why you love it, because I think there's so much you could talk for days about it. But I think just to summarize in a way is that communication is everything. We're so easily verbally communicating right now, which we take for granted, and I think that's what really makes speech and language therapy so important, because the impact, if we couldn't do that, is substantial. And so providing individuals with a means of communication, I think, is just vital to any life, and that's what I love about it so much.
Fantastic. Yes, we do this easily, and we do take it for granted. So, Philippa, you're next on my screen. So, what would you say to people? What do you say to people?
I say that some of the words that we've heard already today about compassion, about being empowering people, caring for people, being interested in language, being interested in learning, being interested in being creative, because we do have to be very creative in about how we work with different people. So I think those are some of the things, and I'm not sure whether it's the right time just to say, but the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists have a website, and that's got lots of information about where to study and the different courses that are available. So yeah, I'll put that.
Yes, no, that's totally appropriate to say that. And you know, for anybody on the call, go to the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy website, because that will obviously give you much more depth than we've been able to cover in 30 minutes. So James, next, what do you say to people who you meet at these parties, these karaoke parties that they all go hoarse at, and you have to treat them in the morning?
I think it's usually me going hoarse at the karaoke party.
Okay, treat yourself.
I think what I'd say is everything that everybody else has said, so I'm not going to repeat it. There's a lot of empathy and compassion is true. Ultimately, what I love about my job is that I get to be really creative in the way that I facilitate that. So yeah, it's a caring profession. But one thing I would stress, and this isn't to, you know, there are people that are going to love this side of it and people that don't, but there's a lot of science, there's a lot of theory, there's a lot of that underpinning it. So there is caring, yeah, it's essential. We need to be empathic, we need to be able to communicate really, really well. But if you're interested in things like science, things like video fluoroscopy, where we're doing x-rays of people's swallows, endoscopy, we're putting cameras up people's noses, looking at all that kind of stuff, I find that stuff fascinating. I geek out on it. We look at like audio analysis and everything. So it's not just about that side of things, but it's important that that's something you're passionate about, the empathy and the compassion, because being able to have all that information that the guys have talked about in the study in the back of your head and deliver that empathically in a patient-friendly way is a real skill, but it's one that I absolutely love doing, and I really would encourage anyone to look into it.
Thanks, James. In all my working years, I've never had anybody talk about putting a camera up somebody's nose. It's now happened twice in the last half an hour. So, you know, every day is a school day. Annalise, I'm really sorry. You might just say, you know, ditto to everything that everybody else has said, but please take the opportunity to give your particular kind of spin on you know, what you would say to people, what you do say to people about the profession you're about to enter.
Yeah, so on top of everything that's already been said, I think it's a great line of work as well, because like Philippa was saying at the beginning, you can work from people from birth to the oldest age. So if, you know, one day you think that you don't really want to work with children anymore, you can still stay a speech and language therapist and work with different client group. If you don't like to be in hospital anymore, you can go in a school or in a nursing home or in people's homes. So it's still there's room for growth even as an individual. So yeah, that's my take on it.
No, that's fantastic. So thank you all so much for coming, Poppy. Poppy would like to talk for days, and actually I'm so interested in this that I would happily talk for days, but our audience will lose patience. They need to go home, they need to get their tea. But thank you so much, Poppy, Philippa, Annalise and James, for showing up and sharing your experience and your background and your hopes and desires. Thank you to everybody who's been attending the webinar, and I look forward to being able to welcome you to our next Becoming Professional webinar over the next few weeks. Thank you.